Well, hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This is probably the 10th take that I've made on this very video, and the reason why is because I am currently dealing with a cough and cold situation. I don't know where I got it. I felt great the last 5 days. I guess it's just one of those things that just brought it up as I woke up. So I didn't want that to deter me from putting out a video today because there is quite a bit that I want to go over with you guys. So just wanted to let you know, if you hear any coughing or sneezing throughout this video, I am going to try to contain myself, but if it does happen, please do not take offense to it. I will do my best to make sure that it doesn't happen, but if it does, it is what it is. Just wanted to let you know and give you a heads up. Okay, next week, we got to talk about that. The main focus of this video is going to be on next week's weather. We are going to be talking about potentially a significant winter system that could impact much of the eastern Great Lakes and even extending as far north and east of New England, places like Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire. And you guys in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, you've been dealing with some winter weather here over the last couple of weeks. So we could be talking about a significant system this time around going into next week. We'll break all that down during today's video. And that could also impact holiday travel. We could be talking about impacts to Thanksgiving travel, maybe even Black Friday travel. So we'll get into all that during today's video. Before we do so, we'll also take a look at what's happening right now, just to kind of set the foundation for what we can expect here, going forward, and sort of tell you where we're at now and where we're going into next week. So if you do enjoy today's video, be sure to like and subscribe, share with family and friends who will be likely impacted by the amalgamous weather that is expected over in the lower 48 over the next week. And with that, let's get into today's video. So as I mentioned, we're going to begin first by just kind of taking a look at what's happening right now. And even before I do that, I know many of you are going to be going Black Friday shopping this year, and I have to tell you, just kind of a side story before we dive into weather, I actually have not gone Black Friday shopping in the last 6 years, and I'm going to do it this year. I went into Kohl's the other night, and I saw some hella good deals. I mean, they weren't deals yet, but they will be deals next week into Black Friday. So I know Black Friday is hella crazy. There's usually a lot of fights, depending on where you're at and where you go. But I think I'm going to do it this year. I'm not buying anything crazy, not a TV, not a PlayStation 5. I'm just, buying gifts for family. I'm trying to figure out what to get. That's why I went to Kohl's last night. And might just be some candles or something like that. I don't know. We'll see. But you're going to want to know what the weather is going to be for Black Friday. You're going to want to know this because you're going to be traveling. There's going to be a lot of people on the roads. And as we know, when you have a lot of people on the road and you got winter weather happening, either whether it's a small event or a large event weather system, it still is going to create some headaches on the roadways. So let's talk about that here. And as I mentioned, we're going to start first by taking a look at just what's happening in the United States as is. We do have this cutoff low, and I gotta say, this has been a really impressive system off the coast of now Miami, Florida. We saw extensive rainfall for folks in South and Central Florida. In some cases, we've seen upwards of 7 to 9 inches of rain within the past 24 hours. It's a lot of rain within such a short period of time. We've even seen some water spouts associated with this system. Thankfully, not much that touched on land. We did have some touchdowns in Key West, but overall, nothing too significant inland for our folks in Miami, as well as Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale. Mostly the biggest hazard there has been the heavy rainfall, and we've seen a lot of that, again, over that really short period of time. Meanwhile, for our friends in the Northeast and New England, you're waking up this morning to some cooler temperatures, and let's take a look at that right now here. Put on our station plots if I can find it. There we go. So we got temperatures in the low 30s, as well as some areas in the 40s and 50s, but you got to get a little bit more closer to the Atlantic shoreline to see some of those early morning warmer temperatures. But at least for our folks inland, right? We're talking about upstate New York, back towards Erie, Pennsylvania, Vermont, New Hampshire. We're waking up the temperatures in the low 30s this morning. And we are going to see some cooler temperatures today, but we are going to expect to see some of that warmth that the Midwest and the central United States has been graced with to eventually move east to where you're going to see some above average temperatures to go into your weekend. So a reprieve from the cold air is in store, but it is going to be about another day or so before we really start to see that warmth move into the region. I talked about the central United States. See all these wind barbs here. Take a look at it. If you follow those wind barbs, you got southerly flow streaming in once again to the central United States, where we are expecting to see temperatures top off into the mid 60s Hey, by the way, for folks even in this region of the country, lower Great Lakes, central United States, even some portions of the Central Plains, we could be talking into the 70s for many of you, even as far north as, say, northern Illinois this afternoon. That is certainly going to be well above average for you folks. Enjoy it while it lasts, because what you're going to find is that we are going to see that cooler air that we see up towards Montana and the Pacific Northwest eventually move south into the central United States, bringing a return of the cold air by the time we get to the Thanksgiving travel week. So enjoy it while it lasts. You got about a couple more days of the warm air before, again, we do start to see that cold air from the northern latitudes begin to intrude into regions that have been so blessed with the warm air and the unseasonal temperatures this last week. Meanwhile, for the rest of the country, we do have some precipitation, typically at higher elevations, especially near Salt Lake City and getting back towards northwestern Colorado. Some of that is producing snow. Again, at some of our higher elevations, we are seeing continuous snowpack increases in places like northwestern Colorado. We saw quite a bit of snowfall here over the last week in places like Grand Targhee and Jackson Hole resorts up towards Wyoming, and as well as some of the resorts in Idaho and Montana. We're going to continue to see that trend, not to give any spoilers away, but we will definitely see that as we get into next week, a continuation of snowfall for the Rockies, as we do anticipate some of that cold air, as we mentioned, from the northern latitudes ejecting southward into the lower 48, bringing additional chances for snowfall for many of the regions of the Rockies that have a really nice snowpack to start out really early in the ski season. And finally, for the West Coast, we do have mainly dry conditions with the exception of the central and northern valley of California, seeing some precipitation as well. Do have some of those colder temperatures at higher elevations, maybe seeing some snowfall there as well, well to the east of San Francisco. And for the most part along the coastline of the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast, we're seeing mainly dry conditions, temperatures as well in the 50s, waking up to some relatively nice weather this morning in those regions. Let's now turn our attention, though, to what's going to change. So what I'm going to do is let's turn all this off here, and I'm going to show you where we're at with our jet pattern. So we started the week in what we call a trough ridge trough pattern. And actually, let me just turn this off here if I can. I think there we go. So we had a trough ridge trough, and it's not going to be drawn to scale, but it essentially looks like this, right? So we had a trough in the West Coast, a ridge in the central United States, and then a trough out here towards Northeast and New England. This is what we call, in meteorology, a progressive pattern, or meridional flow. Basically means this wavy pattern that I drew out for you guys is sort of what that means. So you see this constant fluctuation. Cold air in one part of the country, cold air in the other, and then somewhere warmth, right? So it's sort of an ebb and flow of above average temperatures and below average temperatures. Hey, we've seen that over the last couple of weeks. Those of you who are sitting at below average temperatures this week, you were likely at above average temperatures either a week or 2 weeks ago, and vice versa. So we've actually seen this pattern. This isn't something new here. We've seen this frequently over the last few weeks, and this is expected to continue over that same span the next couple weeks, and especially going into early December. This was the jet stream that we started with this week. Today, if we observe it, we have a polar jet this time, then we have a Pacific jet, and we have more of a jet coupling, right? So once again, a coupled jet out towards the Northeast and New England. What we are going to expect to see is we're going to go from this, essentially, to something that looks more like this. So rather than a trough ridge trough, by the time we get to next week, we're going to be talking more about a ridge trough pattern, to where much of the region, as we just alluded to, that has been above average, the Midwest, the Northeast, and New England, we're going to be expecting them to be above average in temperature. Below, below average. The regions, again, Midwest, Northeast, New England, were above average. We're going to expect to see below average going into next week, and that could also lead to some snowfall chances in a lot of those same areas. So let's actually jump into that right now. And I think the weather models themselves, especially the GEFS, the GFS, to name a few, really do highlight that so much better than even just my simplistic drawing. So let's look at the GFS ensemble. And we're going to pull up the same thing, right? We're going to look at a 500 millibar wind speed. This is essentially our jet stream level. So as we draw it here, right, think about it this way. We got a trough, ridge, and somewhat zonal flow, but we do have a trough that exists up here towards New England. Watch what happens when we skip ahead towards the beginning of next week. Look at that, right? That is a huge difference. Now you're talking about a ridge, so we're talking about above average temperatures for the West Coast and the Rockies, and then below average temperatures for folks in the Midwest, and then eventually into New England and the Northeast. Now, what's interesting about the GEFS, and I've seen a lot of discussions about this, while we are going to be talking about winter weather here for folks in the Midwest, the Northeast, and New England, there also is another storyline going into next week, and that is this system. Look at how dynamic that is. It's a very strong shortwave trough that moves through the, essentially through Dixie Alley, through the Deep South. This could mean severe weather for these areas. Now, it is still rather far out, but from a synoptic scale point of view, if you are in the Gulf Coast, all right, I know we're talking also about some significant rainfall there as well with this system, but severe weather, there is definitely a chance for any of the areas that are boxed here. We still have to nail down, ingredients. We don't have our convective allowing models just quite yet in this time range. We are talking about all the way out to Monday, and it's still about 4 or 5 days away. So what I'm telling you now is just be prepared, right? Just know that there is the chance for severe weather in this area. There's a lot of things on the models that still need to be resolved and a lot of ingredients that we still have to establish with this system. But just based on the synoptic profile, I'm relatively concerned for that area, and definitely keep an eye on that. We'll continue to monitor this here going into the weekend, and we'll likely be updating you guys on that severe weather potential going into next week. But again, the main focus, at least for today's video, is going to be the winter weather. And as we go forward in time, that trough is eventually going to eject east-northeastward as well. And rather than talking about severe thunderstorms for this region, we'll be looking more at the potential for some wintry precipitation on the order of sleet, freezing rain, and snow for a lot of you. Particularly where I have higher confidence in snowfall, and we're going to pull up a snowfall map here in a second, is definitely going to be the eastern Great Lakes and even Lake Michigan on the eastern side for folks in Grand Rapids, and even to a degree Michigan City and Valpo. I will say this, the reason why I have such a high confidence in the eastern Great Lakes snowfall setup, in other words, eastern Great Lakes getting the most snowfall and the higher confidence they do get snowfall, is because keep in mind this is a pretty broad cold air advection regime, and these winds themselves are going to be sort of in this periphery, right? They're going to be more sort of west-northwesterly. That is going to provide enough fetch to create essentially condensation above the lake due to that temperature differential, and thereby produce snow near Erie, Pennsylvania, to the north of Buffalo, Niagara Falls. So if you're in Erie, PA, if you are in the eastern Great Lakes, if you're in Grand Rapids, you certainly want to keep tabs on this forecast, because we could be talking about our first significant lake effect snow event of the season. Also, we could be talking about some snowfall to the east of the Great Lakes in portions of upstate New York, again, back towards Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And let's take a look at that right now, just to kind of conclude the discussion here. And we'll pull up just the overall 10-to-1 ratio looking at the GEFS ensemble. Remember, folks, ensembles are really just looking at sort of 18 different solutions, averaging them out, and providing sort of a mean. And really giving us a confidence interval with our forecast. So as we go forward in time, this is taking us into Thursday and then Friday. You notice that beyond, Black Friday, you see these snow totals really increasing in places like Grand Rapids and Traverse City, to the east here of the eastern Great Lakes, right? Out here towards even Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, in this case, Lake Ontario. Certainly could see some snowfall there. Higher confidence really does exist for the lake effect setup, but that's really not going to set in until once that system passes through. That would essentially take us into late next week, into later in the weekend. Very, very far out, but the point is we're certainly expecting to see some snowfall potential even as far back west as, excuse me, the lower Great Lakes. Continuation of snowfall for the Rockies, as we just mentioned, and that's pretty high confidence in that solution just because of the overall synoptic flow being very favorable for upslope development of snowfall. And then if we look towards the Northeast and New England, we also have higher confidence existing in the eastern Great Lakes because once that trough moves through, it's essentially going to be bringing through some west-northwest cold air advection over the lake that provides enough fetch and thereby enough of a condensation regime due to that thermal gradient between the lake and above to produce snowfall downstream of where that lake is, right? And in this case, it's going to be areas just to the east of Lake Ontario. So could expect to see some snowfall here for many of you in the Northeast and New England, and that's really, going to take us, essentially this starts around, Wednesday night into Thursday, right as we're beginning to travel, or really the peak travel of the Thanksgiving holiday season, as well as Black Friday. We're going to keep close tabs on this. As I mentioned before, it's very far out. I just want to make you aware of it because the likely case scenario is that we are going to see displacement of cold air positioned at northerly latitudes to eject southward, and that would then increase our chances for some snowfall here in a large swath of the country, especially the eastern half of the United States, getting back towards the central, as well as even the Rockies. So, one last thing I want to show you before I forget, because I would totally be upset if I didn't show you the other potential. You know what? I'm going to hold off on it. I was going to show you sleet and freezing rain, but I would even argue, look, it's hard to pinpoint snowfall totals this far out. I'm confident that there's going to be some sort of event in the Northeast and New England. So it's already difficult to pinpoint snowfall as is. I was going to show you sleet and freezing rain totals, but that is so even more heavily dependent on temperature, even more variable than snow, and that says a lot. So I'm going to hold off on that just for the sake of conversation. And with that, that concludes today's video. So if you did enjoy today's video, be sure to like and subscribe, share with family and friends, and we will see you tomorrow on our next winter weather update. Take care. Bye-bye.